You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It's easy to kind of crap on the Chicago Bears right now and point out all the things they're not doing well and that's going wrong with the franchise. But let's take a different approach today, and let's look at specifically where this team can get better coming off of a win over the Lions and trying to somehow stay in the hunt on those playoff graphics you see on the television. This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm an analyst for Pro Football Focus, and I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you're subscribed to the Locked On Bears YouTube channel as well to keep up with all of our video podcasts. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today and every day. We're here for you 5 days a week. And on the show today, we're looking at through maybe more of a, not an optimistic lens, but we're just thinking growth mindset today, right? It's easy to get down on this team and to point out all the things going wrong with them. And we've done plenty of that. And we're not going to pretend like this team doesn't have major, massive flaws that are clearly holding them back this season. And the results have spoken for themselves. But there are areas where they can get better. And I think there's a few things that stand out as a little more obvious. Other things a little bit more difficult to kind of piece together. But I think the theme we'll have today is about trying to find better ways to maximize the team's strengths, because some of the weaknesses are just going to be a little bit difficult to truly hide. But if you can do the things you're good at a little bit better, maybe you can overcome. So we'll talk about what the Bears can do on both sides of the ball, in the backfield with the quarterback, maybe with some of the bigger men up front, and certainly defensively trying to find some answers for the injuries and some of the inconsistency they've had there, but maybe turning to some of the younger players that have played better as opposed to some of the other guys that maybe have struggled more than you'd like to see. But I think as I look through this team's performances this season, look across the roster and try and figure out, okay, like where is something missing? Where is the untapped potential here? It really started to find a main obvious theme. Like I will say overall, right, it felt like this offense was getting somewhere with Justin Fields, right? I think we heard Tony Romo talk about it a little bit in the Ravens game, that like maybe it felt like they were close to turning a corner, and maybe that was a little bit too optimistic. And Tony kept referencing his conversation with Ryan Pace, and maybe he's got some friendships there that put a little bit of a rose-colored or I guess blue and orange-colored goggles on for Romo in that broadcast. But regardless, right, there was offensive progress, and it felt like they were starting to get closer to some things. Certainly against the Steelers, the comeback and all that, and Fields was a big part of that. Dalton certainly doesn't have the same like talent as Fields in terms of like the skill set, but he has a certain level of consistency, and he certainly hasn't been bad and passed for 300 yards last week against the Lions, right? There's reason to be able to continue some of that momentum as Dalton gets sort of readjusted to the starting lineup here, however long Fields is going to be out. But if I look at like where this Bears offense can improve or find something that they haven't found yet, I really think it's in the running backs, right? Think about just generally, that is where the strength and depth of your offense is, and kind of your whole team right now. If you think about like the deepest, strongest position at the top, and also has, depth down the roster with Montgomery, Herbert, and Damian Williams when he's available, and then maybe eventually Tariq Cohen if he's ever able to come back from his ACL injury this season. But that the absence of Tariq Cohen, I think, has been particularly felt when you look at the passing game, because I was running through the numbers just last night, and the Bears have the fewest receiving yards by running backs of any team in the NFL, and they have the fewest catches by running backs of any team in the NFL. David Montgomery has 12 catches for 103 yards. Khalil Herbert has 9 catches for 44. Williams has 11 for 64, and Ryan Nall also has 1 in there for 4 yards as well. The running backs just have not at all been a part of the Bears passing game. Certainly the passing game in general has struggled and has fallen behind, and that's part of why the team is last. But part of it is not having Tariq Cohen as a threat out of the backfield. But we know David Montgomery is a more than capable pass catcher. Khalil Herbert did it in college and has caught passes now in the NFL. It's not like either one of them has issues with like drops or they're not faster enough to get open, right? It's not a talent issue in the passing game. I think part of it's a scheme thing where they've gone to more play action, and because the offensive line hasn't been as consistent, they've had to give more blockers staying in to help the offensive line. And more often than not, that's been running backs, especially lately as the tight ends have gotten more involved in the passing game because they've been pass blocking less. And so there is this give and take of, if you put Montgomery and Herbert out as receivers more, that is one fewer blocker to protect your quarterback. And so your offensive line there's a give and take there with this offensive line where they have to play better so you can have fewer running backs into catch passes. And it's also true that just throwing the ball to the running backs is not an instant formula for success. If you're checking it down to them for -5 yards in the backfield before they have to try and make a guy miss to gain 1 or 2, that's not really productive offense. But it's about getting your running backs involved in the short to intermediate passing game beyond the line of scrimmage. The little check down curls out of the backfield, or maybe more vertical routes out of the backfield, or ins and outs or double moves, a little Texas route, bend it outside, then break it to the inside, get those one-on-one matchups against linebackers in coverage. I will take that with David Montgomery and Khalil Herbert, and of course, Tariq Cohen all day long. And so I think there's a really clear area where you can get more out of your passing game by using your better players more. And that means getting back to the running game too. I mean, the running game was a big success for Fields when the offense was, even though they were losing games, at least when the offense was starting to score more points, right? The running game was a big part of the offensive consistency and controlling the ball. And that was non-existent against the Lions. They could not get the running game going. So I think if you can take 300-yard passing Dalton, who is solid, but not spectacular, and then add in the running game back and getting running backs more involved in the passing game to defense in different ways, so you're not saying curl routes downfield right there. I think there is a path there, especially I think that's sort of the low-hanging fruit I see is like, hey, you raved about it in the preseason, you raved about it all season long, that the running backs have been not only the offensive identity, but really I think where the depth and talent is most concentrated on this Bears offense. So let's use them, all right? I mean, novel concept here, put the ball in the hands of your good players. I think the Bears need to do that more with these running backs. But I also think there's more they can do offensively to try and open things up a little bit more and score more points than they have the last couple of weeks against teams that they really should have scored more points on. We'll kind of look around the rest of the offense before we turn our attention to the defense later on. Next on Locked On Bears. The point spread for Bears Cardinals over at betonline.ag has the Bears underdogs by 8 points at home. That line has shifted slightly from where it started down in the 7.5 range and is slowly kind of going even further away from the Bears, but you can get a pretty good odds on the money line. You can get, I think, Bears plus 285, almost 3 times the money if you bet on the Bears to win straight up, and they do pull off that upset. Over-under set at 45 points as well with our friends at BetOnline, the number one place we recommend for all of your sports action this season, from basketball, football, college football, hockey, boxing, UFC, even they have your favorite Vegas casino games online as well. So don't wait to take advantage of all the different amazing offers they have. Sign up today for a free account and enter in our promo code Locked On, and they're going to give you a free 50% welcome bonus, giving you free extra money to play with and bet on at betonline.ag. It's the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. Improving this Bears offense starts for me with the running backs. But I think as you start to look around a little bit more, you can find other ways they can or could get better. And this is all sort of, these are ideas. This is on paper, and execution is a very different thing. And, Matt Nagy doesn't listen to the podcast. As far as I know, I don't think he's going to take all these ideas and implement them. And they're not, running backs is not equal to offensive success guaranteed, right? I mean, like, the Lions are among the leaders in passes to running backs because their wide receivers are so bad, right? Because they don't have other options. So there's a middle ground here of like, get the running backs more involved, but if you can only pass your running backs, then you also have a problem. And the Bears need to go from bottom of the league to more like middle of the pack. Kind of seems to be where the balance is, where you're getting the running backs involved and making the defense cover them and get those mismatches where you can, but then also having downfield passing and getting wide receivers and tight ends and, a more balanced all around offense. And so like, I look for the Bears to do more of that, right? We saw Darnell Mooney break the 100-yard mark again last week against the Lions, even though it didn't feel like pretty offense, and certainly finishing drives in the red zone and getting points was more difficult than getting yards. But I think we can continue to see more improvement there. This Bears offense getting better as Mooney continues to grow into this larger role. Cole Kmet, back-to-back games, or this sort of stretch before the bye week and coming out of it, like he's been a more involved part of this offense. He's making the more difficult catches. He's holding onto the ball through contact. He's getting open. He's not creating like yards of separation, but he's getting open enough first, and maybe his quarterbacks are trusting him a little bit more, right? It's all a lot of different dynamics that go into the tight end being more involved, but young players, both second-year players growing and getting better, even as it hasn't necessarily translated to the full offense just yet, because so many other things are also going on around them now that, Allen Robinson misses games with injuries. But I think with Mooney playing well and Kmet playing better, right, add Robinson back into the mix, and maybe there's more opportunities there. Maybe the coverage is a little less focused on Robinson, or maybe he's got a little bit more space, or maybe the offense is figuring out some things concept-wise that he can potentially get a little bit more involved. And I just feel like, especially with Robinson out, and now Marquise Goodwin was hurt or got hurt last week against the Lions, your wide receiver depth is getting pretty thin. And so again, I kind of come back to this idea of where is the depth and the talent on your offense if it's not going to be at wide receiver, because you got 4 tight ends right now, and all 4 have made decent plays. Excuse me, you got 5 tight ends if you count JP Holtz, as I think of him more as like a fullback special teamer. But you have 4 quality pass catching tight ends in Kmet, Jimmy Graham, Jesse James, and Jesper Horsted. And we've seen Horsted make nice touchdown catches. Jesse James touchdown catches. Right? They haven't really been big parts of your offense. And again, like the formula is not throw 10 times to Jesper Horsted. I mean, he's your number 4 tight end for a reason. It's not saying like, hey, get all these end of the bench players as many touches as possible, but it just doesn't feel like the Bears are necessarily utilizing their strengths. Like that, the depth at tight end is a strength. And instead we're seeing a lot of, wide receiver off the practice squad, Isaiah Coulter and Jakeem Grant and Damiere Byrd, guys that just haven't been playing particularly well and haven't been, they're just not guys that you consider strengths, right? They're more like fill in weaknesses. And we kind of feel like tight end depth is a strength because they have experience there and they have skill sets there that can be valuable for your offense. Not that it solves all the problems, but you start to mix these things together, right? You get David Montgomery and Khalil Herbert the ball more on running back screens or Texas routes over the middle, check down type plays, but it may be even more like directed, like running back routes that can be built into the offense, and not just check downs behind the line of scrimmage, but 5, 6, 10, 15 yards downfield. Then you get more athletic tight end like Jesper Horsted or even Jesse James in there and get some of those matchups that you like, in addition to Cole Kmet and Jimmy Graham. And you fold that in with a little bit more of the running backs. And then maybe you add Allen Robinson back into the mix a little bit more. And maybe some sort of combination of things can help this offense just find that little extra edge and be a little bit more consistent, because it just doesn't seem like what they've been trying has been working well enough. And it's just like, I'm ready to kind of just try anything new, right? New passing concepts. If the current ones aren't working as much as you want them to make them work and you feel like you keep trying them, maybe they'll work. How about you try something different? The way we did, or the way we saw them do last season with Mitch Trubisky, when out of the bye week, they switched up the whole offense and it wasn't, it worked. And maybe they're not in the same type of position to do that with matching up quarterback with scheme. It's not quite the same comparison with, Dalton doesn't need to switch offensive schemes necessarily in the same way that Trubisky did. But, we heard Matt Nagy say a lot this season and in years past, like running concepts that the quarterback likes. We know Bill Lazor knows what Andy Dalton likes from Cincinnati and trying to do those things. Well, if those things aren't working, then maybe we need to do some things that Dalton doesn't like, right? Maybe just because the quarterback might prefer a scheme or a concept or whatever, sure, that's good if it works, but if it's not working, then maybe it's time to not do what you don't like. Maybe what you don't like might be good for you. It might challenge you or stretch you or grow you in a different way to kind of help the offense going, right? There's a you might be more inclined to make the right reads and the right decisions. Well, that hasn't necessarily produced points yet. So maybe going at it a different way could lead to miscommunications. I don't know, could lead to more difficult reads and maybe more mistakes from Dalton. We don't know. Or it could open some things up in ways that maybe he didn't realize, that you kind of don't know what you don't know with some of those things. And maybe you get a little too comfortable with what you do know. It's kind of spitballing, but it's like, try something, because the offense just has not after a 5-game losing streak and barely beating the Lions, you have not been able to fully consistently enough put up points, or you were starting to with Justin Fields, but you're not doing it now with Dalton, and it's not going to get easier against the Cardinals or the Packers. So having that sort of sense of urgency here with the playoffs getting closer and closer to out of reach and some really real teams on the schedule here, really contending NFC opponents over the next 2 weeks, it's time to try something new, certainly on offense. And I think defensively, with some really good offenses now you're about to face, the Bears defense has to try something, right? I mean, they just it's been a little bit too easy against bad offenses, and it leaves us a little concerned about how easy it's going to be against good offenses the next couple of weeks. We'll try and find some ways this Bears defense, can maybe start to get better, or things they can try, or where we can look for optimism at the very least next on Locked On Bears. This holiday season, grab the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. It's the reason we call it the world's best tasting protein bar, because it's honestly better than a candy bar. Built Bars taste sweet and delicious like candy bars. They're soft, they're easy to chew, and each one is covered in 100% real chocolate. But unlike, the sweets at the checkout line at the grocery store, every Built Bar is low sugar, low calories, high fiber, and high protein. And it comes in a bunch of different delicious flavors: raspberry mint brownie, double chocolate cookies and cream, peanut butter brownie. I've got coconut brownie chunk in my cupboard right now. It is my favorite flavor of Built Bar. You can't go wrong with any of them, but I promise you will find at least one, if not many, that you love. And you won't find a product on the market anywhere like this that tastes this good and is this good for you. Head on over to built.com and use our promo code LOCKED15, and you're going to get 15% off your next order. And spoiler alert, you can use that promo code more than once when you reorder too. Promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. It's easier for me personally to look at this Bears offense and find ways to make it better, or where they can find improvement, or things to try to do differently. And maybe that's a personal knowledge bias. I mean, I just think I feel like personally I have a better grasp of offensive football than defense. Like, offense comes a little bit easier to me than high level defensive scheme and coverage schemes and those kind of breakdowns. Like, I mean, like I understand. I mean, I can read coverages, but like, defense is just a little bit more difficult for me than offense. So, and I think it's harder to just like scheme away talent deficiencies on defense, because in so many ways you rely on all 11 players to do their job. Whereas on offense, if you have a wide receiver run a bad route, if he's not the one you're throwing to, you can I think you can hide deficiencies on offense a little bit more than you can hide deficiencies on defense. And that's maybe I'm wrong, but that's sort of the feeling I get about defense. And so, like, when you look at this Bears secondary, right? You bench Kindle Vildor, you put Artie Burns out there. Neither one is good. And you don't, unless you sign an outside free agent late in the season like this, and no guarantee that they're going to be better either. You like, there's not really a good option there. And you can't just always put a safety over top of every route and every receiver that weak cornerback spot is going to cover, especially because, you're definitely very limited with the slot cornerback position as well. They've been rotating all sorts of guys there the last couple of weeks. And then now you've got Roquan Smith potentially missing time, and you're definitely going to have some, and of course Danny Trevathan too. So you're definitely going to be weak at linebacker and going to need coverage help there. So, like, right, the safeties haven't been great either, right? So you can't just hide. Maybe it's easier to hide one bad spot on defense, but when you've got 2 or 3 on the back end in coverage, there's not just a way to do that, or you can't just call certain schemes to make it work, because then quarterbacks can read that too easily. You become too predictable because it's obvious where your weakness is, and it's obvious how you're trying to protect that weakness. And so there's no low hanging fruit like running back position on offense where you can look and say, oh, well, they could try this and this and this, because they just clearly aren't doing much of that offensively. Defensively, there's like a few things here and there, but it's not. There's no magic bullet or obvious solution that comes right away to mind for me. Like, like, I think I look back at the same idea of like, okay, get your best players on the field and maximize some of those strengths if you can't maximize your weaknesses. And like, I noticed against the Lions, all of a sudden DeAndre Houston Carson played like 4 snaps. I mean, he started the week before for Eddie Jackson, He played like 80, 90 snaps in that game, and he's been one of the more consistent defensive backs for the team, whether it's in the 3 safety role or in the starting lineup. Like every game he's played, he's stepped in and been at least consistent and more consistent than some of the other guys. And not that, playing DeAndre Houston Carson is not going to fix this Bears defense, but it just feels like if he's playing well, why isn't he out there on the field somewhere? I mean, I guess, you don't want to bench Eddie Jackson necessarily. You don't want to bench Tashawn Gibson necessarily. Can you get him in more 3 safety looks? Can you get Eddie Jackson, back closer to the line of scrimmage? They were doing some different hybrid roles with him earlier this season where like he was blitzing a little bit more and kind of playing up. And I know like none of the roles seem to have worked for Eddie Jackson necessarily. They haven't been able to unlock him at this point. And I kind of feel like that's a similar conversation as we talked about with the offensive scheme in Andy Dalton, where it's like, what can you try? Is there anything different we can try with Eddie Jackson to get him going? Because he hasn't gotten his hands on any passes this season. He doesn't have interceptions. His pass breakups have just been completely lacking at this stage. I still hasn't registered one now in the 9 games he's played. He's not gotten his hands on a pass, broken up a pass. He's not playing that same sort of like confident, aggressive Eddie Jackson playmaking that we're used to. And so is there anything different they can try? Like you can't, do you call more cover 2? Do you call more cover 4? I mean, it's all about this mixture of which coverages you're going to call, I guess, but there's no perfect formula of like Eddie Jackson needs exactly this many cover 1s and this many cover 3s. And, I just try something different is all I can come up with for Eddie Jackson. Cause what they've tried so far just has not gotten him going. And I'm sure Sean Desai is racking his brain over this, trying to figure out ways to do it. And it just hasn't really come together here for this Bears safety, a player we thought that could get back to some of that Pro Bowl level under this defensive coordinator and trying to get back into this scheme and try and open things up in some way for him. But, then you got other guys missing from this defense, Khalil Mack, Akeem Hicks. You can't just replace them by blitzing a little bit more or running more stunts, right? I mean, those players are injured, and that's going to hold you back to some extent. And I don't know that you can just, undo that schematically. He's just too important. They're just too valuable. But, Travis Gibson has been playing well. He's been improving all season long and getting better and looking like almost like a starting caliber edge rusher, the way he's played some of these games. And of course, Robert Quinn has been playing really, really well. And, one way if you're looking for this Bears defense to get better in that pass rush department, they brought in Bruce Irvin. He's on the practice squad, presumably will be ready to be promoted to the active roster soon, hopefully. I mean, right, they brought him in a couple weeks ago. We're sort of wondering when that might start to take place here. So there's a potential opportunity for this defense to get a little bit better. I wonder if Mario Edwards should be back from his rib injury soon. He hasn't gone on an injured reserve. We've seen him be a guy that can come in off the bench or in the starting lineup and be a high motor spark, right? It can provide some of that energy and make some plays and be a playmaker. That's why they gave him the big contract extension or the big contract that they did to have him come in and be a part of this defense. But then even like 2 weeks ago against the Ravens, we saw Ladarius Mack get promoted from the practice squad, and he didn't play that much, but he did get in on a sack. And so, but then last week against the Lions, he's not on the roster again. So, it's like, I'd like to see the players when they're playing well get more playing time, like him and DeAndre Houston Carson. Ladarius Mack and DHC are not going to fix this defense, like I said, but it's just like little things to find little areas to get better. That's kind of what I'm looking at for this defense, because I don't think there's like wholesale changes you can make to fix where some of the problems are. But if you can get 5% better here and there, I think it can start to make a difference. Especially you'll need any kind of difference maker you can get against the Cardinals and Packers. We will get more of an in-depth scouting report on the Bears' opponent on tomorrow's podcast. It'll be crossover Thursday. Bo and Alex from Locked On Cardinals going to join us to let us know what's going on with Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray and what the Bears can expect in those matchups. So make sure you tune in again for that one tomorrow. Make sure you're subscribed to the Locked On Bears podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. We're free and available on all platforms, especially if you're on the YouTube channel. Appreciate all the comments, everyone who watches the video, subscribes, likes, and contributes to that conversation as well. So thank you for making Locked On Bears your first listen today and every day. If you're looking for your second listen today, don't forget to check out our podcast, Locked On Bets, here in the Locked On Podcast Network. That's our sports betting podcast. Lee Sterling has been hot this season, getting the advice out to you on where to bet at BetOnline.ag, and the payouts have certainly been there all season long. They do a great job with that show and gets you a nice, sport across sports where his locks are and his upset alerts and all that stuff. So check out Locked On Bets when you're done with Locked On Bears. Come back tomorrow for crossover Thursday, all in one large effort to make it that much easier for you to bear down.